Said What I Said is a podcast hosted by Herb Howard and Toussaint Warner, where they discuss the most relevant topics impacting Black people from an unapologetically Black male perspective. They like to call it intellectual thuggery, because while these brothers are cerebral in their thought process, they also recognize white supremacy relies on brute force. The Chicago Defender had a chance to talk to Herb and Tu about their podcast, their passion for Black America, and why it's important for Black men to have these important conversations. So tell me a little bit about each of you guys' individual background. Like, how did you decide to do a podcast, and what made you decide the theme and the subject matter of your podcast? Because I love the title. I Said What I Said.
Yeah, I would say that it goes back to 2015, right after the Justice for Us March, when the minister called for people to come back to DC, kind of like the 20-year anniversary of the Million Man March. And coming from there were different chapters across the country, these Justice or Else, different chapters. And the Chicago one would meet at the mosque on 74th all the time. And so Toussaint and I were always going there and then doing some work with this initiative that we had on 79th Street to kind of quell some of the violence that we tend to see spike around the Labor Day or Memorial Day. I can't remember which weekend it is. But in that's kind of how we got to know each other. And so we would just have conversations about, what it would take for us to kind of overcome some of the obstacles that we face as a community collectively. And we just decided to, maybe we should have these conversations publicly. And so they were from private conversations that he and I would just have privately to conversations that we would then have on the airwaves at WVON. And so we would have these conversations, and they became really, really popular. And they started to gain a lot of traction, and people would call in, even though we were doing a time slot most often from 9 p.m. to midnight. And, just having been familiar with radio for a while, and specifically that station, that's not a time slot that gets a lot of listener engagement in terms of calling in and talking about it, things like that. And every single time we did it, the phone lines would light up for 3 hours, and people would just be engaged in the conversation and want to add their input to the conversation. And so it then became a question of, okay, well, maybe we should turn this into a podcast so we can kind of control the time, control exactly, the exact content in terms of how we want to say the things we want to say. Obviously, you can't do that on radio. So we started to do it initially at Tu's house, in Tu's kitchen. And people continue to gravitate towards the conversation. And it's just grown from there. We keep trying to evolve the conversation and find ways to keep it rooted in its core values about, Black liberation from an unapologetically Black male perspective, while also trying to make it, entertaining enough for people to want to latch on to it. And so that's kind of how that thing has evolved since 2015.
So to talk to me,
real quick, I just wanted to add on, it's also a void in the marketplace. And what Herb said specifically was unapologetically Black from a male perspective, right? Black masculine perspective. Let me not even say male, masculine perspective, because that's different. It's a void in the marketplace. And immediately, like he said, from the 9 to midnight slot, you could see the phone calls lighting up. From my kitchen with a cell phone, we was doing something like 30,000 views a month. You know what I mean? So the void just kind of compelled us to keep going.
Well, that was what I was going to touch on, the fact that this is a podcast featuring two Black men, very unapologetically talking about real life issues. What are some of the things that you guys are discussing with your readers or your listeners on your podcast?
Masculinity specifically. We just had the conversation just the other day about gender, understanding of gender and then context around gender. When we had the swimmer that just won or beat the Olympic record, but he's now a transgender swimmer. Like, these are conversations we don't address, not at least from the perspective in which we want to address them from. You know what I mean? And because there's no ownership other than us, we say what we really feel. And there's seemingly a whole community that believes in what we're talking about.
Hence the title, I Said What I Said.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, we say things that we feel need to be said, and we do it in an unapologetic way. Where most people will kind of push back against certain things and say, "Oh, I don't know if y'all should say that." It's like, well, I said it, so it is what it is. It needed to be said, and we talk about it, in terms of whether we're talking about the financial arena, the justice arena, education, food, farming, health. We talk about relationships. Once a week on Fridays, we discuss relationships because we believe that is a core foundation to build upon everything else, right? So we talk about the education and finance and things like that, but unless we can get the relationships, on solid ground in our community in terms of, parental relationships, spousal relationships, peer relationships, business relationships, we can't get those relationships solidified, then everything else we're doing is really for naught. So we approach all of those different subjects and do it from, again, just an unapologetically masculine perspective.
What I think is really cool is that it is two Black men who are having these conversations. And typically, whether in podcasting or any kind of communications arena, you're not hearing Black men talk openly about relationships, feelings, interacting with women, parenting, for example. Do you feel like you mentioned that there was something missing in the marketplace? Do you think those conversations, about some of these more emotional kind of issues are relevant and needed amongst Black men?
I think they're necessary for sure. Herb will tell you specifically, I hate having that conversation, but I think it's necessary, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the taglines for our show is intellectual thuggery, but we address these issues like we talking on the stoop or we in the garage, right? I.e., I said what I said too, right? We know who our audience is, and we want to filter these messages to our audience, information that they usually don't hear, but in a language that they can understand. You know what I mean? So even when we address the relationship conversation, I don't think it's avoiding the marketplace for that conversation. I think it's avoiding the marketplace for the way we have that conversation, right? So another moniker that you're going to hear on our show all the time is that until you fully understand white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything you think you understand will only confuse you. We come from every topic that we approach it from that vantage point. Right? There's a perspective that you're going to have because that's the perspective that the world wants you to have. And then there's this other perspective that might be more based in reality. Right? So even in regards to how we view and value each other in the relationship space, most of our relationships aren't tinctured on a spiritual existence. It's not. It's about how can I leverage your value to increase my living standard. That's it. You know what I mean? We had that conversation. That's what Facebook exists on.
Right.
You know what I mean? But nobody goes beyond the surface of that context. So we try to take it beyond the surface of that context. And we also fairly vulnerable. We both comfortable in who we are. So it's, we're not scared to speak our truth. And that might be abnormal as well.
So for those who don't know about your podcast or who haven't heard it, what would you tell them your podcast is about? Who is it for?
That's a great question. I think it is for anybody who is interested in the conversation about Black liberation and interested in trying to solve some of the issues that we face. And you can do it in your own ways. There's a lot of different ways to go about it, right? There's no, you have to do it like this, you have to do it like that. And I think that for us, what's interesting about our demographics, if you will, or analytics, I would say, is that although we're always talking about, it's two Black men, unapologetically masculine perspective, the majority of our supporters are women. And that's very, very interesting. And so we don't specifically try and target women, or we don't specifically try to target men either, but it's interesting that the conversation that we have seems to be so well received by so many women. But in terms of who we're going after or how we would tell them about it, it's a really, really good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think Herb said Black liberation. I think more about self-elevation. You know what I mean? And I think that's kind of the problem. It's like we're all kind of immersed in the illusion of what America presents and don't spend any time trying to understand it fully. We just kind of do. You know what I mean? I think we've stepped away from being human beings and we're just humans doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We're all immersed in an illusion and a maze that kind of forces us to live along a pathway for the duration of our lives, while really not fulfilling our own specific God-given journey on this planet. You know what I mean? And I think that's an elevated conversation. And I don't think it's not that black men ain't having this conversation. I don't think nobody's having that conversation.
Right, right.
You know what I mean? And we try to have it in ways, like I said, like we're on the stoop. So we might present it through the lens of, I don't know, what's going on with Kanye and Kim K today. But let's dig deeper than what the average person is talking about in the media paradigm. You know what I mean?
Now, do you guys ever bring on special guests, or is it just the two of you guys?
We bring on special guests. We had Uncle George on the show. George Daniels on the show this past Wednesday or Friday. Wednesday, I think he was on the show, and we've talked to different guests. Everybody like from Loon, who's a rapper with Bad Boy, and he's now kind of completely adjusted his life to where he no longer even listens to music, following his decade-long stint in federal prison. And so that was a really, really interesting conversation we've had with him. Lots of different public figures from around the city, whether they be artists or comedians or singers or whomever they may be. We've had different people come on for Relationships Friday. That's always like when Two is like, he knows I don't like these conversations because on Relationship Friday, like we really try to incorporate every aspect of relationships. So that may be strippers, that may be sex workers, that may be whomever, and they've all been invited to come on the show, and they have come on the show and have those conversations. And so we definitely try to incorporate, different people and different perspectives into the conversation. We don't believe that we have all the answers. It is a collective conversation for everybody to be a part of. And so long as you understand that there are issues that we have in the Black community and you are in some way, shape, or form invested in solving those issues, we want you to be a part of the conversation. And so that's mostly what our listeners and our viewers come to understand. That's also how we go about deciding who we would like to come onto the show and have those conversations with us.
Mm-hmm. It's also an intergenerational conversation, right? We kind of fit into this sweet spot where we can have an up conversation and a down conversation. So we, some of my favorite guests, Uncle Walt, we got Uncle Walter Beach, ex Super Bowl champion, but he's I think he's 89. Brilliant man. We just had Salim Muwakil a couple of weeks ago, also another brilliant man. And on the opposite side of that, we've had drill rappers. You know what I mean? So it's varying degrees of conversation. And I don't think you have too many spots where you get that wealth of experience.
Right. So what do you guys? Oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add on to that. Like we view that we take that responsibility very serious in terms of being that link to connect different generations, because we are so well suited in the middle to where we can like Two said, reach above us to people who are more experienced and more information and willing to share with us, and we're happy to sit there feed and learn. But also we can then make that connection from 89 to 18. Those are the kind, like, we feel that we take that responsibility very serious. We think those intergenerational conversations are necessary.
So what do you guys want, or what do you guys want for the future of your podcast?
We want to grow the conversation, right? It's interesting, right? I think this is more of a spiritual commitment than a financial commitment. It's for me at least, right? And I think that, I think we're moving into the fourth industrial revolution. Like, I know we're moving into the fourth industrial revolution. When you think about the position of Black people in America, we've not left the servitude position, right? And we're moving into a space and place where there's no need for a servant. They're going to have robots to do everything that a servant could do. They introduced Tesla technology. CDL drivers is over with. You can go to McDonald's right now and order right off the computer screen, and they don't need workers anymore. So when you think about us being a service class of people and our value system being entrenched in, even though we don't really have access to, but our value system being entrenched into what capitalism provides, we got to change our structure. We got to get back to community and relying on one another and rebuilding what it means, or down, maybe rebuilding in the word, maybe building a real culture, So for me, that's the goal. How fast and how far can we spread this message? Whatever comes from that, whatever benefits come from that, that's icing on the cake. But the reality of it is, I think of it as an alarm system. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. That's exactly what we are. That is exactly what we're doing. That is exactly what we're doing.
So tell all the Chicago Defender readers where they can find your podcast.
They can find it at Herb and Two. I Said What I Said on Facebook. They can go to the website. It is IsWizPod, ISWIS, acronym for I Say What I Said, IsWizPod, POD.com. That's a place where they can kind of get to know us a little bit, but they can also find links to all the shows. That's the place they can go and support the different merchandise we wear. So sometimes we'll have like hoodies or t-shirts or things like that are available to our supporters. And so that's the place they can go. That's iswizpod.com. And then like I said, the Facebook page is Herb and Two. I Said What I Said.
And YouTube is the same thing. And we're working on probably getting on the DSPs, the Spotify and stuff like that, probably within the next week or two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Instagram is IsWizPod as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys for talking to the Chicago Defender.
Appreciate you.
All right, y'all take care.
You do the same. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
This is Danielle Sanders reporting for the Chicago Defender.